Welcome to Studio 411. I'm Larry Dasilva, your host for the program. Our guest today is Hartford Courant editorial cartoonist and nationally syndicated cartoonist for the Cagle cartoon group. Welcome, Bob Englehart. Bob, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
And Bob, when we were putting the ideas together for this show a few months ago, I said, oh, you know, Bob and I had some dealings. As a matter of fact, let me show you a quick picture here. I'm going to hold this, see if one of our camera people can get this. One of the charities that my wife and I are involved with, I'll throw a plug, Rock and Jock Charities. They're out of Rhode Island, rockandjock.com. We had contacted Bob about a cartoon he had done that came out during the passing of Davy Jones, the singer, songwriter that was with the Monkees. Anyway, just to throw out a public thank you from us and also the charity to Bob. This wound up being framed along with a piece that Davy had signed for us about 5 weeks before he passed.
Excellent. How much money did you make on it?
This, actually, when I told you the other day, I misspoke. This raised close to $700.
Really? Excellent.
Okay.
I'm glad
So
to hear
this
that.
was you know, something that was great. And again, as you can see, it was a color, we'll call it copy, whatever, signed by
Sign
Bob.
print.
Sign print. Okay. And up here somewhere you can see where Davy had signed this. And again, you know, both obviously Bob, terrific to do that for us, and Davy, you know, couldn't have been any nicer. So again, just a public thanks from all of us for that, and I wanted to make sure you saw that because that meant a lot to us. Back to the book, Bob has written a book that again is part memoir and part, I guess, fascination, obsession, whatever you want to call it, of
investigation.
Investigation. Kind of a myriad of all three and then some, called Track Rat, Memory of a Fan, or Memoir, pardon me. Memory would be that you're not here with us, and yes, you are here with us. A few of the characters in the book perhaps are not here, but again, tell me, there's a chapter about 3/4 into the book. Back about 2007 was when you kind of started to put together some information, or we're going for a book, but it really wasn't going to be so much memoir as maybe about just the inner workings of what goes on at a racetrack, a short track.
Yeah, I'd read about the tragic accident involving the Blewett brothers from New Jersey who were racing at Thompson International Speedway. They wrecked in turn one. The older brother who taught the younger brother how to race, they crashed, and the younger brother's car landed on top of the older brother's car, and he died instantly. And I thought the irony on that was just overwhelming. And I thought I wanted to do a narrative nonfiction. I wanted to write a book without cartoons in it. I've done cartoon books before, but I wanted to do a book without cartoons just as a challenge, just to paint word pictures instead of pictures. And so after this accident, I thought, well, I'd like to write a narrative nonfiction story about this, involving the brothers and how they raced and when they raced. Because I love racing. I've gone to the track, what the book is about, since I was a little kid. And so I went to Thompson, the start of the first race in 2008, and I was going to do research and get to know drivers and get to know all the ins and outs of racing, because even though I've been a fan since a little kid, I didn't know all this stuff. I didn't know how much it cost. I didn't know what was involved. I didn't know how much work they put into these cars. And I was in the stands, and young Shane Hammond, 27 years old, midget driver, wing midget driver. The cars are about the size of your desk, and they have a 300 horsepower motor in them and a wing on top, and they'll do 147 miles an hour going into the turns. Wow. At Thompson. And Shane got into the back end of another race car. Their open wheels, when cars have open wheels and their wheels touch, anything can happen. And his car just flew into the air and flipped and hit headfirst into the Budweiser sign. And I was stunned. I'd never seen anything like it before. I've been going to races all my life and never saw anybody die on the racetrack. I saw number 3.
Oh, the Dale Earnhardt.
Dale
right.
Earnhardt die on television, and it didn't look that bad on television. Never saw anything in person, and I was shaken to the point where all my plans changed. I thought, my God, I've got to write about this. I've got to come to terms with this, because if I don't know if I can come back to the racetrack again. I don't want to go see people get killed. I'm going to see wrecks and cars flipping, but I want to see the driver drop the net and climb out and wave to the crowd and everything's fine. That's what started me on this book. And then as I got into the book and started researching it and meeting drivers and owners, my wife said, you ought to write about how you became a race fan, about your childhood. You've had an interesting childhood. All right, so I thought, I'll work that in there. So it's a combination investigation of short track racing and memoir of how I became, basically how I became a cartoonist. Overcoming a childhood illness. I had rheumatic fever. I was in bed for a year.
6, yeah.
Yeah, age 6, in bed for a year, with nothing but my imagination and cartoons and paintings and drawings, and I drew circuses and race cars and cowboys and Indians. And the penicillin kept me alive.
Now, for those of you who obviously most wouldn't know, again, you were raised, I believe, born there as well in Fort Wayne, Indiana, correct?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Which I have not had the privilege of going to Indiana, so to me that's like, wow, it's like a whole other world.
It's exactly in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
We call it the hole in the donut.
Okay.
There's Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis, and then there's Fort Wayne.
Now, to digress a minute, and I didn't have a chance to look this up, because you're a couple of years older than I am, but back in the 40s and 50s, wasn't there a Fort Wayne basketball team?
Yes, the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons.
That later
which became the Detroit Pistons.
That's what I thought,
Right.
And of course a little before my time, and I wasn't even sure if they were around when you were a kid.
Oh, they were, and I had relatives that worked for Zollner Pistons. They actually made pistons for International Harvester trucks and other companies.
All right.
And Fred Zollner owned the Fort Wayne
There we
Zollner
go.
Pistons.
All right, so that clears that up for me. You spoke about Shane Hammond again. Talk a little bit about Shane. I mean, I got the impression that he had a lot of obstacles in life, and obviously
He did. He had a rare disease called polycystic astrocytoma, and it's a disease that causes tumors. It's not cancer, but it causes tumors in the brain and in the spinal cord, and it's extremely painful. And he developed this, I think, when he was 12, around 12 years old. He was diagnosed. And racing was his outlet. Racing was how he expressed himself, and it drove him. No pun intended, but
right. Well, and something you just said. I mean, obviously, you had your 1 year there with the rheumatic fever, and again,
right.
It kind of, looking back as I read the book, and I don't know. Hopefully, this is the same with all of us. I'm not sure where my change probably is now working here at Nutmeg Television doing this show, but at a much older age. But it sounds like obviously, his physical ailments, kind of drove him to become the racer that he became.
Right,
just like
right.
then you, because of, again, there were no video games, there was barely
right.
TV.
It's funny how circumstances in life kind of send you off in a direction. A positive direction.
I think sometimes things will send you in a direction, and I think sometimes we don't know that we're being sent there. It's almost like you have to either take a chance, or sometimes it's just a combination of things that leads to it.
Right. My goal in life was to, not to draw editorial cartoons, was to have a commercial art studio in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I worked for the Chicago Today in Chicago, right out of art school. And the art director, we had 2 editorial cartoonists working for the Chicago Today at the time, and both of them took Monday off, which left it open to anybody who wanted to draw a cartoon, I suppose. That's the way I looked at it. And I asked the art director if I could draw an editorial cartoon on Mondays, and he said, "Sure, go ahead." And the first cartoon I drew, I was stumped. I wanted to do it. The news story was that investigators had found a Ku Klux Klan cell in the Chicago Police Department.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty weird. So I'm thinking, now how can I draw a cartoon about that? And I was walking across the Michigan Avenue Bridge going to lunch on a windy day, Chicago, the windy city. It's always windy. And the wind blew up this girl's skirt in front of me. And I immediately had this cartoon idea of a Ku Klux Klan guy with the robe, with the wind blowing, and you see a Chicago policeman's uniform underneath.
Okay.
And I titled it The Windy City. And I thought, you know, if I'm walking across the bridge and the wind blows up a girl's skirt and I think of an editorial cartoon, I should probably think about becoming an editorial cartoonist. And I didn't right away because I had my goal to have my art studio in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which I achieved. Had the studio, and then I noticed that the morning newspaper, the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, didn't have an editorial cartoonist. I didn't realize that when I was a kid growing up in Fort Wayne. Moved away, came back. My eyes were open now. So I did a couple cartoons on local issues and took it to the newspaper, and the editor of the editorial page liked them and bought them. I think I was getting $20 a cartoon for freelance to draw editorial cartoons. And pretty soon they started buying 3 a week and then 5 a week. Then they started calling me their editorial cartoonist, and I was still doing freelance.
I was almost saying, yeah, freelance on commission, yeah.
But I decided that I had to change careers, and I gave them first shot. I said, you know, if you pay me $15,000 a year, I'll give up my studio. I'm a thriving studio. I'll give up my studio and I'll work full-time as your editorial cartoonist. And I said, Bob, there's people working here 20 years aren't making that much money. So I thought, okay. So I moved from Fort Wayne to Dayton, Ohio, got a full-time job there, made enough money to support a family, and then came here from there. And that's how it all worked out.
The rest is history. Now, you talked about it at one point in the book, by the way. Our guest is Bob Englehart, again, author of Track Rat, Memoir of a Fan. Of course, you folks know him from his several times a week, I want to say daily, but occasionally there's an imposter there on the
5 a week.
5 a week of the Hartford Courant, the editorial cartoonist. You talk in the book about how, looking back, when you had a family and 1 or 2 children, all of a sudden you said, oh, well, you know, geez, maybe I want to like take up racing. And again, this was, I'm sure, when things would have been a lot cheaper or whatever. But again, you found yourself, I think, like I did in my life, where all of a sudden when I left radio, to digress for a minute, all of a sudden it was like, wow, you know, I can't do this. I got mouths to feed, you know. So then my path took a different direction, and I wound up leaving, you know, that part of my life. In your case, you actually thought about almost at age 40. I did,
but it was mostly fantasy. I mean, I had my own goals, and the thing I found out about racing is that it's really a family affair. Most racers are the children of racers and the grandchildren of racers. Grandpa started racing back in the 40s. Dad started racing in the 60s. Sons racing in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Even the flagman at Stafford Motor Speedway is a second-generation flagman. Wow. So racing is a family thing. It's been around for generations.
Speaking of family things, because again, I'm familiar with his son, if not one of his sons. You mentioned, tell me a little bit about, you had an encounter or met Richard Petty at some point in your life? Yeah.
Well, that was at ESPN. My wife and I were doing what we called a video comic strip for ESPN on Sunday mornings. She wrote the script, I drew cartoons, and we talked about sporting events that happened that week, right. Usually centered on one event. And we were dropping off, we would go to ESPN every Thursday to, I'd record the video and we'd shoot the scripts and all that. And we drove into the parking lot, and Richard Petty drove in right next to me. And I got out of the car, and there he is. And he's a big, tall guy,
yeah,
skinny guy, black sunglasses, black cowboy hat. And he says, "Hi, I'm Richard Petty," you know. And before he even asked, he whips out a couple of postcards and signs the postcards and hands them to me. I said, "Thanks. You want to race to the exit?" he was a good guy.
I've heard nothing
Very
but
generous.
good things about him. Now, from Richard Petty to, of course, talking short track racing. Again, I'm impressed and amazed that, again, females, obviously in the sport, a lot of folks think of just Danica Patrick and maybe one or two others that came along, like with India, and Janet Guthrie was another one.
Right, right.
But again, obviously at a different level. Talk a little bit about your encounters. Obviously, we talked about one on the phone the other day. One of the more successful female racers,
Renee Dupuy.
Yeah, that's racing, and also let's touch upon the 3 tracks in Connecticut, of which I have not been to one, but certainly after this discussion, I will have to make time to go. We have Waterford.
Waterford Speedball
which
is the smallest track. It's 3/8 of a mile. It's always in danger of going out of business.
Yes.
The fence is rusty. The stands are. I went out there at the start of the season this year, and half the stands were blocked off because the town had come out and condemned them. And so I assume they're fixed by now. I haven't been back. But the thing about Waterford is the track. The racers love the track. It's a great track. The track itself, it's got 2 grooves. It's got a high groove, you can win from the top, and it's got a low groove, and you can win from the bottom. And like I say, it's not a big track, so there's a lot of passing, a lot of action. That's the smallest track. The Stafford Motor Speedway is the next. That's a half-mile track. That's probably the most professionally run track in the state. But that can all change with Thompson International Speedway, which is changing its name to Thompson Motorsports Park, I think they're calling it. Thompson is the biggest track, 5/8 mile track, but they're expanding, and they're bringing in a 1.7 mile road course.
Oh, okay.
They started out with a road course many years ago, back in the 40s, back in the 50s, early 50s. Then they ended the road course and just did the oval course, but they're bringing the road course back. Apparently, they signed a deal with one of the casinos out there. And they're doing like a country club where you can join for I don't know what it costs.
That's what I was going to say.
$100,000 or something. Because Lime Rock is doing the same thing. Yeah. It's like a country club. If you own a race car and a trailer and you want to bring your race car out there and drive around, or if you have your Corvette, you want to bring your Corvette out, it's for well-heeled folks.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing about racing in general, at the higher levels, it's for wealthy people.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
it's very expensive.
You just triggered something when you mentioned about corporate involvement, we'll call it. And it's funny. You would think, because you gave me the idea with Waterford, you would think that the powers that be down in that part of the state, that they would try to join forces, the different Indian tribes down that way that would, help to boost Waterford. Now that you mention it, we had to send them a copy of this tape.
I was talking to a customer down there at the start of the season who was telling me about how some of the ski resorts up north were in trouble, and they sold memberships in the ski resort, and he thought that Waterford could do the same thing, sell memberships in it.
There you go.
I don't know. I'm not a businessman. I'm just a fan, so...
Getting back to, we were talking about the female racers again, is that something where there's a large influx, or is it because of the cost involvement and the time involvement is limited?
I don't know. I think it's just because it's male-dominated culturally. Women can drive as well as a man. I mean, women have just as much chance of winning as a man does.
I mean, from what I read about Renee, who you mentioned earlier, I mean, it sounded like at age 8, 10, and 12, I mean, she was racing, obviously, midget cars and whatever else, and she was beating guys that were her age and sometimes older.
one of the male race drivers, one of the winningest race drivers around, one of the winningest race drivers in Connecticut is Ted Christopher. And he said about Renee, his quote was, "That skirt's got some balls."
Yeah. Okay. Are we still on the air? Okay.
Can you see that on cable access?
I think we're good. I didn't see any lights flicker, so
Okay.
I think our production head is okay. Discuss with us right now, and again, we're speaking with Bob Englehart, Hartford Courant cartoonist and also author of a Track Rat, Memoir of a Fan, joining us today on Studio 411. Talk to us about the costs of racing. I was boggled at the lower level. We're not talking folks like IndyCar, NASCAR. I mean, even though NASCAR obviously likes to hold its its broad spectra over all of racing, or so it thinks. But again, just I'm hearing like $14,000 a year for tires.
Yeah.
And then there was
that was in 2008.
Yeah. And
a lot of the numbers I have in here, and I explain in the book, they're from 2008 because that's when I was doing the research, and prices have only gone up since then.
And there was another mention. Forgive me. It was something that caught my eye. All $100,000 for this or for that, and I'm thinking again, it's just mind-boggling that these folks again have to come up with the funding, or again or sponsors, which is not necessarily the case at this level, to be able to do this.
Well, they could find sponsors at this level. I think it costs $10,000 to put your name on the hood of the car for sponsorship. But a race car driver will have a three-wing binder and go around to potential sponsors and show them their car, their record, what they're looking for. I mean, and the thing about sponsorship is that race fans are very loyal to the people that are sponsoring cars and the tracks and whatever. So that's business coming in the door. Yeah. CarQuest used to sponsor a lot of races at Stafford Motor Speedway. Now it's Napa.
Okay.
But that people that go there are going to switch their allegiance from CarQuest to Napa. Mm-hmm. So that's the fraternity of racing.
Going back to your childhood again, raised in Fort Wayne, again, a wealth of information and things that you talked about again that in many ways, I think, like with all of us, help shape our being or our lives, whatever. You talked about with the rheumatic fever at age 6, and you mentioned, I'm quoting, your escape was on paper.
Yes.
And again, that was something where when, like, at age 4 or 5, I mean, was there someone in the family that was, an artist, or that you said, well, where does this talent come from? Or is it just, natural, God-given?
My mother
had
a great deal of drawing talent. And as a hobby, used to draw fashion drawings, the kind of you used to see in newspapers. You don't see them anymore in newspapers. But she'd do fashion illustrations of models, and that was her hobby. And I didn't learn until much later in life that she was offered an apprenticeship at a local department store to draw and learn to do fashion illustrations for the newspaper. But her parents, my grandparents, wouldn't let her do it. Wow. Women just didn't do those things. I mean, I don't know who they thought did, because they were women that did those things.
We're talking at that point. What? Give me an idea. Late 30s, early 40s for her.
Oh, this must have been early 40s.
Early 40s. So
yeah.
Again, and again too with the war years.
Right.
Obviously, there were women being given the opportunity to do a lot more things, because obviously the workforce was depleted, because many of the men probably on a scale of 1 to 10, 9.99 versus obviously there were some females and not in combat but serving the troops, USO and that kind of stuff, but obviously the jobs needed to be filled by somebody, both at the factory level and also obviously at the newspaper.
Yeah,
so,
she had talent. She went to high school with Bill Blass. Bill Blass went to Southside High School in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay.
And she went to school with him. She had an art class with him, and he drew a picture for her once and gave it to her, and she threw it away because she didn't like him.
Wow. And it's funny, you mentioned the thing about what the newspapers used to do. I would say, again, I grew up in the Fairfield County area, so again, even maybe sometimes you get a hold of an old catalog or whatever. I don't know what was the Spiegels, you know, some of the bigger ones, or Montgomery Ward, whatever. That, again, sometimes the images would be, again, what you would call a sketch or a drawing, where before everything evolved into photo. I'm sure they probably thought that was a cheaper way to do things, or back then they didn't have the technology to, like they developed years later. Yeah.
No technology.
Your first taste of racing, again, probably, like I think a lot of us, again, was, you know, the Indy 500, which is amazing how so many NASCAR people, you know, that I've met over the years, you know, really, that's almost like a bad word, Indy 500, you know, it's like, other than, who was it, Danica Patrick, who, what did she do? She went from Indy to NASCAR?
She made the
switch, but otherwise I was like, almost like I think the folks that I grew up with, like, you know, an A.J. Foyt. I mean, he was, to me, was like my Mickey Mantle of racing. It was like, winner of 3 races, and then the Unser boys, and you go back a few years before that, the
same people, though.
Same
really.
People, the Vukovich
Bill Vukovich.
family. Yeah.
Bill Vukovich was, he was the first driver that I became a fan, and he was killed. You know, I look at the films of the wreck and what they thought safe cars were in those days. They thought a safe car was a heavy steel so that it didn't crumple. I mean, now they know that the crumple zone in the car is very important. Cars are made to crumple now because it absorbs the blow, absorbs the shock. They didn't know that then. And you see films of Vukovich's crash, and his car just bounces end over end, and it doesn't crumple. And
didn't
all
some
that,
of them just have that, like, one bar? Or was that later on?
that was later on.
That was later on.
And
almost like kind of like a bar like the football players had. It was like one bar, you know, as opposed to this intricate thing they have now. Cars, you know, so you're saying even before that, what did they have? They had nothing.
Right. There's a movie called Big Wheel with Mickey Rooney. Yes. And they use actual footage from the, I think it was a 49 Indy 500, 1950 Indy, one of those. And there's a couple scenes where a car swerves, crashes, hits the wall, the driver's thrown out of the car, and he gets up and runs across the track and gets back in the car and drives away.
As you mentioned earlier with the late Dale Earnhardt, obviously not likely, even by today's standards. Tell me a little bit about Eddie Doyle. Tell our viewers about that. And I don't know if you got. We'll go to camera 3 while Bob is talking. See if you can get a photo of that. That's Eddie Doyle, correct? I'll hold that so the camera. Tell us about Eddie, because at first I'm reading this, and at first I said, wait a minute, wasn't that the guy who was the French Connection?
It was Popeye.
Popeye, and I'm thinking, was his name Eddie? And I'm saying, wait a minute, who's Eddie Doyle? But the way you're so descriptive, the way you talk about this person, I thought it was actually like someone real life, like you had talked about
he was real to me.
Yeah, he was real to you, but I'm saying it's just amazing.
Yeah. No, that's my total, complete, made-up invention, cartoon character that I made up called Eddie Doyle, who was a race car driver and raced in Indianapolis 500 and midgets and sprint cars, and raced all over the Midwest and won every race he was in.
There you go. Wow.
Even after crashing.
You were better than an agent.
Well, you know, it was interesting that when I was in the 6th grade, we, our teacher, Mr. Broombaugh, decided we were going to have a class newspaper. And so we had news and views and stories and the comic strip. And I did the comic strip, and the comic strip was Eddie Doyle. And it was an adventure strip. It wasn't a humor strip. It was an adventure strip. And the kids would ask me, you know, what's going to happen? And everybody got into it. And what's going to happen with Eddie Doyle this week? And I'd say, I don't know. I don't, because I didn't know. I had to make it up like the night before. There
you go.
Supposed to run.
This was at what age? How old were you there?
Well, 6th grade.
6th grade. So
12.
Okay.
Around 12.
Right. So
11.
Quite a few years since the rheumatic fever. So you were up and at 'em, and already not only the talent as an artist, but also up here you're like inventing stories. Amazing.
Well, Eddie Doyle got me my first kiss. Susan, I won't mention her whole name, but Susan was a girl in my class who was a fan of Eddie Doyle, and she told me how much she liked Eddie Doyle, and she told me in a way that made me think I had a shot at her. So went to her house one night, and I wrote about it in the book, and I heard from a friend of mine that I grew up with who said she gave him his first kiss too. So I thought, well, I felt betrayed now. 60 years later.
There you go. But see, you had
Well,
that
not quite
thing going.
60
You had
years, I thought I was the only one.
You had the drawing talent. And you had the storyline credit. So the girls like that. They see, oh, this young guy, he's got something going on.
Yeah, it must be.
Here.
I don't know.
You mentioned before about the movie The Big Wheel. I was thinking about more later vintage. Like I remember Fireball 500. It was like a Frankie and Annette Fabian movie. But again, when we were kids growing up, I'm trying to think what other racing movies. I was trying to think of usually a lot of B pictures, but the Mickey Rooney one I remember when I read about it.
I think it was the age I was when I saw it or something, but it seems to me that that's almost the only satisfying racing movie I've seen. So many racing movies are not satisfying.
Right.
There's something about, I don't know why. I think it's because I go to the track, I see live racing, which is so exciting. And I'll tell you, for one thing, you can't capture the sound of a race car in the movies. You can't do it. You can't do it on TV. You know, when the Indianapolis 500 cars go by, and that's nothing. I mean, man, they are the loudest cars. NASCAR, you start with the entry-level cars and work your way up. They get louder as you go up. And Sprint Cup cars, the loudest cars I've heard. I haven't been to an Indianapolis 500 race yet, interesting enough. But I've been to NASCAR, and man, they will just blow out your eardrums. And I was at Stafford Motor Speedway a couple of weeks ago on a Friday night when there was no rain,
There you go.
which is very rare these days. The cars were so loud, they hurt my ears because I hadn't been to the track. You know, ironically, I've spent my time writing this book. I didn't have time to go to the track.
There you go.
So it's like the shoemaker's children go barefoot.
And while he's busy writing the book, again, Memoir of a Fan, Track Rat, author Bob Englehart, again, Hartford Courant editorial cartoonist, joining us today. And so now that the book is finished, now you have all the time in the world to go to the track. And
it rains every Friday.
It rains every time, yeah. Now there was.
I usually go to Stafford Motor Speedway. It's my favorite track. I like Thompson too, but it's like an hour and 15 minutes away. And Waterford, well, it could be improved.
Yeah. Yes, so I'm told over the years. Maybe, but again, I'll definitely touch base with you and say, okay, is it maybe you're going down there? Fine, I'll take a ride down and experience it. One thing too, I read in the book that I hadn't realized, and of course I wasn't at the amusement park, but I think once, because again, where I grew up on the other end of Connecticut. I mean, Hartford to us was like a foreign country. I mean, like an hour away or whatever as a kid growing up.
Yeah.
But then I heard that Riverside, what I knew as Riverside Park, I went there like in the early 70s.
Right.
And then I'm reading in your book that there was actually a Riverside Park Speedway or whatever they would call it.
Right in the middle of the park.
And I'm like, of course, now that's Riverside is now, I guess, owned by Six Flags, whatever. But again, I couldn't believe it. I mean, why did that ever end?
I don't know. That was the first track I went to when I moved to Connecticut back in 1980. Well, that would be the summer of '81. And Reggie Ruggiero was he was the star, you know. And they had figure 8 racing. Okay. Now that's interesting. Yeah. Because there's where they come together in the middle. You got to hit the brakes and you got to watch out. And
now, you just reminded me, I was thinking about this earlier today. For me, as a kid growing up, and the show started, I think it was 1960, 1961. So by then you were already like a late teen, early adult, or getting there. You know, Wide World of Sports. When I was a kid, all of a sudden you see especially Long Island, they were like the kings of the, what's the word I'm looking for, where the cars all smash into each
Demolition
other.
Derby.
Demolition Derby. And of course,
West Islip had a track that was famous for.
And of course, as I guess cooler heads prevailed, and pollution standards, and God knows what they decided. Well, we can't have this anymore. There, too much soot, too much smoke. So let's bring the Islanders
I don't know
in.
if that's what did it in or not, because there's plenty of soot and smoke at a regular race, and that's part of the charm.
Yeah.
If you ask me.
I mean, I actually went to a demolition derby a few years ago. We were up at a place for a concert way up north in New Hampshire, and it was a fair, and they actually had a section where they had, a demolition derby, where it was only like about 2 or 3 cars, but it still took me back to my childhood, watching those, one of many things they did, obviously, on a show like Wide World. But it was just, I said, wow, that's great. I mean, I think it's good, but,
Well, if you want to have fun at Waterford Speed Bowl, go see a school bus demolition derby.
There you go.
They get a bunch of old school buses, yellow school buses, big school buses. Last time I was there, I think they had about 8, 10 school buses and going at each other. And the object in a school bus demolition derby is to take off the front end.
Oh, okay. There you go. So the only time I saw
a school bus is pretty much worthless without a front end.
The only thing time I ever saw a school bus used was back in the day when like an Evel Knievel used to leap over them. Sometimes not so successfully, but talk about I guess you took Skip Barber classes, and I knew about Skip Barber growing up, but fill us in a little bit. Again, he was. I assume no longer with us, or is he still?
Alive? I think he's still alive.
Still alive.
I'm not sure. He was a Formula One driver and left the sport to start his own driving school. And he has a driving school at Lime Rock Park in Lakeville, Connecticut. You can take a class there to drive. Well, you could take several kinds of classes. Actually, you could start at Skip Barber, and if you're young and have a lot of money, and you can work your way up to a Formula One ride. And it'll cost you millions of dollars over many years, but his is like the entry-level place to go to learn how to drive an open-wheel race car, and that's what I was driving. It's called the Formula Dodge at the time. They're not using Formula Dodge anymore, they use Formula Mazda.
Okay.
But it's a open-wheeled, small race car, 130 miles an hour, 4-speed transmission. The car I was driving, you lay down in it, I mean, it really felt good. It felt comfortable. The seat felt good. They show you how to put your hand on the steering wheel and adjust the steering wheel so that in the crook of your hand.
Okay.
But before you even get in the race car, there's I think it's an hour and a half in the classroom, something like that. An hour in a class. Talk about how to go into a corner, how to tire patch, they call the part of the tire that makes contact with the track. And they say, don't close your eyes when you wreck, you'll miss the best part.
Okay.
So they have a good sense of humor about it. But it was fun. And I don't know if you've ever been to Lime Rock, but they have a diving turn. There's a turn that comes down the hill and into a right-hand turn and onto the straightaway. Mm-hmm. And the straightaway is long, and it's where you go the fastest in the whole course. But when you're coming down that hill, and I've seen races there before, and I thought, my God, how do they hold a car on the track going downhill, full speed? Well, when I was there, when I drove that track, I found out that as you go down the hill, it flattens out, and gravity pushes you as hard as it can to the track. You can go around that corner almost as fast as you want.
Wow.
So, and boy, that's a thrill. And the thrill of, the basic thrill of racing is about speed and going, your internal organs sliding sideways as you go around the corner. I mean, that's a fun feeling.
There's one theme, I think it came from that section on Skip Barber, but it runs throughout the book with the different racers that you talk about. But basically, in my words, no fear in a race car. And that seems to be the overriding theme, not only from your experience, limited in terms of behind the wheel of a car like that, but from the different people, again, like the late Shane Hammond, Woody Pitcat, countless others. You mentioned someone before again.
Christopher,
Yeah, Renee.
Sean
again,
Foster,
we talk about just the Blewett
Renee,
brothers again.
Nicole Morgillo.
Yeah, just amazing. Again, racing. It seems like starts early in youth. I have someone that used to work with, and I don't know. I think it's up in the New Hampshire area that they live in Newington. Mm-hmm. But the husband is very much with his two adopted kids into midget cars. And again, and I'd be like,
right.
Where's Dick going? Oh, Dick is up at the track. And again, I mean, the car, the vehicle was constantly in need of repair, constantly in need of something.
Yes.
And this is like, I'm picturing like someone like saying, oh, I better fix my 10-speed today. Better fix my 10-speed
right.
again the following week. But I like, you guys want to get together? Oh, no, Dick is up at the track. It is.
Oh, you can have a wreck in a car and in a race car and do $25,000 worth of damage that has to be fixed by next week's race. So you got to find the money, you got to find the time, you got to bend everything back, you got to take a torch and cut broken things off and weld new things on. But getting back to the race cars and the no fear in a race car, thing about race cars, there's two reasons I think that's true, is that they're made to go fast. So the faster you go in a race car, the safer it feels. And the other thing is the safety features in a race car are just phenomenal. I mean, and then they adapt these safety features from race cars and put them in passenger cars, and that's why we have such safe passenger cars these days.
Gotcha.
As opposed to 40 years ago. But and it's also a problem in a way is that, like the seats in a Sprint Cup car, an Indy car, are molded to the body of the driver. The driver sits in a mold at the shop, and they make a cast of it, and they make the seat fit exactly his body. And there's bolsters that come on either side, so your head can't go too far. But that's also a problem because you can't see what the car that's next to you. You can only see straight ahead. The visibility in a race car, this is one of the things I learned that was just blew me away. The visibility in a race car is almost impossible because you get the bolsters here, you get the helmet, you get the goggles, you got 3 straps that go down the front windshield, you've got padded roll cage, you can barely see what's going on. So you have to have a spotter up in the stands on the two-way radio telling you inside, clear, clear, clear.
But now contrast that with what we talked about, not going back as far as the big wheel days or Bill Vukovich, but let's say back to the 60s and 70s, okay, when we were a little younger, and all of a sudden, even the 80s, all of a sudden, people were probably doing this. Oh, yeah, he's gaining on me. I mean, there was
they still have, most of the divisions don't have two-way radios. Most of the divisions, the drivers do have to look around and make sure they're not running.
At this lower level, but I'm saying, I'm even talking like NASCAR or Indy back in Richard Petty's days. Yeah. I've seen some of the cars, or even A.J. Foyt, Mario Andretti in the late 60s. Yeah. Again, they didn't have those. I see the things now where they look like they have these things that they look like they're almost like honeycombed curtains or whatever. Maybe that's part of what you talked about to kind of hold things in place. But I don't know how they can even maneuver in there.
Yeah.
Or if someone has to take their place, maybe not at that level, but what you're talking about is that the seats or the compartment is almost molded to someone that's 6'2". What happens if a 5'7" guy takes its place?
He can't. You can't. You got to have someone either similar, or they got to put another seat in the car.
Real quick, which in this case might not be possible. We're talking with Bob Englehart here, who's joining us today. Again, Hartford Courant columnist and author of Track Rat, Memoir of a Fan, and again, just a very good read. We've got a few minutes left, but real quick, touch upon Racing with Jesus Ministries. I got a kick out of those.
Yes.
Reverend Don and Reverend Dan, and I heard they've added a few more to the flock.
Yes, they have. This was started by Richard Petty with NASCAR back in the day. He decided that the drivers need some spirituality, and suggested that a traveling church, come to the tour with the group. And so Racing with Jesus tours with NASCAR. There's a touring group of NASCAR called the Wheeling Modified Tour. and they are the open-wheeled modified race cars, like the SK modified race cars at Stafford and Thompson and Waterford. But they tour. They go around all the Northeast. They go down to the South, and Racing with Jesus goes with them and administers to him. When on Sunday morning after the races, most of the races are on Friday or Saturday. Sunday morning, most people who are race car drivers camp out at the track, and the next morning they can have Sunday service. If there's a bad accident, the ministers will consult with the people.
And I got the impression, or maybe I was incorrect, when the accident you saw back in '08, was that in place there or no?
It was, but not for the touring midget group. Okay. Shane Hammond drove a wing midget for a Northeast Midget Association called NEMA. Racing with Jesus doesn't follow them.
Okay.
But they were on the bill with the Wheeling Modified Tour and several other groups, because this was the first race of the season. There's like 200 race cars out there. So the Racing with Jesus was at the track, and they just went ahead and did their thing with the NEMA people who needed it. And thankfully, there was a lot of people that were traumatized.
Well, no doubt. I wanted to read something on page 142. 3 things to do to make a winning car. And this was by a couple of gentlemen here, John and Jay. Elaborate.
John and Jay, yes. They are the techies, the head techies at Stafford Motor Speedway. Gotcha. And they were hired to be the head technical inspectors because they were the biggest cheaters in racing when they were racing. So they know everything about cheating.
And basically, just to kind of summarize what they say, communicate with the crew chief. 2, maintain the car. And 3, make sure everything's in place: motor, transmission, rear end, and chassis. And if they do that, then you'll be a success.
You don't have to cheat. You don't have to cheat. If you do everything right, you don't have to cheat. And they use Ted Christopher as an example as a person who does everything right. And he doesn't cheat because he's always winning. His car's going to be inspected. If he's caught cheating, he'll lose the first place, So he doesn't cheat. He just does everything right.
There you go. There you go. In the remaining few minutes we have, and again, there's so much more to cover. Again, perhaps down the road we'll have you back on again. We'll talk about some things again, more about your upbringing and comic strip influence. Because again, as I spoke, when we originally wanted to have you on, it was because of, again, your work that you've done over the years via the Kern and obviously with Cagle Group as well. But again, this obviously is such a big part of your life, and as I think the folks will see when they read the book, that again, there's so much. Everything has kind of come full circle. I think
Yes.
Between. Obviously, you talked about, your mom, your dad. Obviously, there was, I think with so many, I had someone once say to me, "Oh, we're all dysfunctional," and I think, that there's just things that sometimes happen that are out of our control, and then, kind of again, either steer us or maybe we learn things from it, some good, some not good, whatever. But again, in the remaining couple of minutes, talk about racing again. Which one comment that's made is that it's more than a hobby. And touch upon also the future of racing in Connecticut as you see it.
There's interesting, the future of racing in Connecticut. There's a writer for the Hartford, used to work for the Hartford Courant, has his own website now, Sean Corshane, has been talking about how race car drivers and teams have to have more of an outreach with the public. They have to put their race car on a trailer and take it to a shopping center, a grocery store, do some promotion. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a brilliant idea because most people, I think, in Connecticut don't realize the vibrant racing scene that's going on in Connecticut. I owned a quarter horse many years ago, and I found out there's a lot of cowboys in Connecticut. Yep. There's a vibrant horse scene in cowboys, Western horse scene in Connecticut. Same with racing.
Especially in the northeast corner of Connecticut. I mean, we even have relatives that where, you know, of my wife's, where they have, you know, obviously enough room because land is a little more, you know, plentiful. They have, you know, horses and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
I think that's what the racing has to do in the future in Connecticut is get out there, get the cars out there. They might have I went to a signing once at a motorcycle dealer in Connecticut, and a bunch of race car drivers sitting behind a bench signing autographs and everything. But there were no race cars there. They should bring the race cars. Race cars are fascinating. I mean, they're just beautiful pieces of equipment. They're colorful. They smell good.
There we go. Yeah.
If you like the smell of machinery.
Well, hopefully, you know, this program will help instill some of those ideas and also encourage folks to, as well as the racers, to do just that. Again, our thanks to Bob Englehart again for joining us, and we'd love to have you back on again down the road. Excellent. Write another book now. Write a book about horses next time.
No, my next book is going to be a collection of editorial cartoons.
There you go.
I can't do another book until it's. The next book I do has to have cartoons in it.
There you go. Track Rat: Memoir of a Fan by Bob Englehart. You'll see on the credits. If you want to contact Bob and get a hold of the book, by all means do so. And again, we appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule. We look forward to seeing your editorial cartoons. One thing I love real quick is at the end of the year, and I know people always say, oh, you know, you forgot this one, you forgot that one, is the one where you have the stars of all the departed celebrities and folks. And again, it's tough because an awful lot of stars.
Yeah. We started out with 7 stars.
Yeah.
I mean 25 years ago.
I don't mean stars and celebrities. I mean stars that have to go on this thing.
Yeah.
And there's always someone left off. So again, a pleasure to have you on. And again, we thank you, all you folks, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time again on Studio 411. For now, take care.